Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Wow, look at that cigar shape coming in over the farmland. Tim, it's headed right towards the windmill there at Proctor's. I think it's gonna. My goodness, it's crashed into the windmill, and there's a little body on the ground. It's very strange. I don't think this is from Earth at all. Tim, what do we do? Call the medics?
Tim, that was my $500 drone that just crashed into the windmill.
Oh, well, I don't know, Tim. It's 100 years ago. I don't think you had a drone then. Anyway, it's very peculiar, very strange. And but then again, what show are we hosting? It's Exploring the Bizarre, and we've got a real strange one tonight. Oh, I'm looking forward to this. I just love UFO shows. I feel right at home, just like I landed here in a spaceship. Did I land here in a spaceship? My goodness, I might have done that. I came in right after Roswell, or maybe right before Roswell, or on the day of Roswell. Maybe I should be somewhere else. But I'm here now, and it's Thursday night. Well, it is now when we're doing this live. And we've got some fascinating guests on tonight, and we're going to go deep into the UFO mystery like we've never done before.
No, that's right. We've never done it before, but I'm still upset about my new $500 drone, Tim. I don't know if I can make it through the rest of the show now. I'm just so verklempt.
Well, we'll look for one on Amazon for you.
Okay, thanks.
But in the meantime, who have we got on this evening?
Oh, we've got great guests tonight. Just so happy we have with us Carrie Trent Haggard and Kathleen Marden, who's been on the show several times. So it's just really great to have these two fantastic people. Now, Carrie Trent Haggard. He is a devoted antique car collector, judge, and restorer for the better part of 25 years. Now, Carrie is the founder, writer, and host of Wheels of the Past Productions, based in Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania. He's a longtime enthusiast of classic horror and UFOs. Carrie first learned of the Aurora, Texas alien crash, which we were talking about earlier in the show, and
making a parody of,
which I lost my brand new drone. He learned about this crash from a friend and Texas native John Cochran in the summer of 2015. Now, due to an incident which Carrie witnessed during his childhood of a flying saucer landing in his small hometown, and we'll have to ask him about that, the story hit him with such passion that he and John spent the next several months working day and night to form an outline for a screenplay based on the fictional hunt for the buried extraterrestrial 100 years later. From there, it grew into the novel Traveler, which we'll be talking about tonight with Mr. Haggard. Now, of course, with us is Kathleen Marden. Kathleen is a leading UFO researcher, author, and lecturer. Her educational background in the social sciences has shaped her interest in scientific ufology. She's lectured nationally and internationally and is a frequent guest on radio shows such as Exploring the Bizarre. Now, many know Kathleen as the niece of Betty and Barney Hill, whose close encounter in UFO abduction in 1961 stirred worldwide interest. And she researched the Hills' controversial case, leaving no stone unturned to separate fact from fiction. This led to a new passion for the ufological truth and the publication of her books with nuclear physicist, scientist, ufologist Stanton Friedman. That book was captured, The Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience. Now, she also wrote Science Was Wrong and Fact Fiction and Flying Saucers. She is also the co-author of the Alien Abduction Files with Denise Stoner, and she has expanded her work to include the investigation of contact with non-human entities, the perplexing phenomena related to it, the history of government involvement in the investigation and study of UFOs, and the cover-up, the commonalities that experiencers share, and consciousness studies. So, Kathleen, Carrie, thank you very much for being with us tonight on Exploring the Bizarre.
It's a pleasure to be back.
Thrilled to be
just
with
like
you guys tonight.
yeah, just like I said, Tim, we could have cut that down to one word: UFOs. Well, I'm anxious to ask Carrie. I first heard about the Aurora incident, and of course, it's a very controversial one. There are some that say it was indeed a legitimate UFO crash, while others say, well, it's just an urban legend that has grown over the years. But one of the first investigators of this case was a gentleman who just passed away within the last year by the name of Hayden Hughes. Now, Hayden Hughes, who happens to, Tim, that Hayden Hughes, who of course was a UFO investigator and put out a very sharp magazine for its time, was also a music manager and booking agent, and he was Sean Castile's manager for a while back when Sean was playing folk music.
Oh, okay.
They're both from Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
But it always struck me as being a very, of course, very unusual case, and one that involved not only a downed craft, possibly from another planet, but we also had here the remains long before Roswell of an alien, supposed alien being. And so now, Carrie, how did you first get hooked on this? I mean, it seems like a rather well. Let's start out perhaps with your own UFO incident. Obviously, that must have had something to do with it.
Well, I grew up in a little town in North Georgia called Commerce. It's between Atlanta and Greenville, South Carolina. And in 1973, during the great UFO wave of 1973, where there were sightings all around the country and in Georgia, my father was a staunch follower of the local police department. So he had one of those realistic brand scanners beside his chair that ran day and night. And there'd been chatter for weeks, probably months, of low-flying craft in the area, people getting all frantic and calling in. Well, one night, the little PD squawk box went crazy about low-flying craft, flaming objects, setting down at the medical center clinic. There had been calls from all over coming into the police. And the clinic they were talking about was the same parking lot clinic next to the hospital that my mother worked at. She'd been a nurse since 1955. So me and her went barreling over there. Of course, I'm 9 years old, but I'm jumping up and down saying, okay, we got to go see about this. And so we get in her 1969 green panel station wagon and go tearing off over there. And there's a fire truck, and there's 2 police cars, and there's 4 or 5 other cars that probably heard the same broadcast we did. But there was no UFO in the parking lot. But what was amazing was there was about a 30-foot circle in the corner of the parking lot that was like smoldering hot in the asphalt.
No way! Wow.
Yep.
Okay, I'm impressed. Should I be impressed?
And all around it were drips of molten metal, like a silver or lead that had dripped into the parking lot. And this is not something that you hear about. This is something that I saw with my own 2 eyes.
Yeah, this should be right up there. Well, did anybody investigate it? I mean, you're obviously only 9 years old, but I don't think you were a member of NICAP or APRA or the Mutual UFO Network at that time.
Well, here's the kicker. My mom came home from work on Monday. This was probably on a Thursday or Friday. And the word had got around. People had been going to see it for several days. You know, everybody's going over there looking at this big burnt circle in the parking lot where obviously something that put out a lot of heat sat down and took off again. And my mom come home all flustered on Monday. And she said, "You'll never believe what they did." And I said, "What?" She said, "They repaved the entire parking lot."
Jesus.
So
Wow.
in the middle of the night, now you got to remember in the Bible Belt South on a Saturday night, Sunday morning, nobody's out doing anything. Well, this asphalt crew moved in there early Sunday morning before the good folks of commerce was out and about. The parking lot had been completely re-asphalted.
Wow. Did this get any kind of attention in the media? I mean, was it on the local radio?
It was in the local newspaper. Now, this was the time in Danielsville, Georgia, which is 12 miles from Commerce. Same year, 1973, July 1st, there was a documented landing where there were witnesses that actually saw the craft land in Danielsville. Like I said, 12 miles away in July of 73. So I imagine this, I don't know when this was, but I know that it was in 73, and I would imagine it was a month or two before or after this happened. And it was the same during the same period where 3 Atlanta television news crew captured flying saucers, flying objects on some of their cameras that were reported on the Atlanta TV news.
Well, Tim, wouldn't you say that that's a pretty doggone well-documented case? I mean, worthy certainly of some research, even though it's quite a few years ago.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I wish that, and who knows? I mean, you know, somebody may have gotten a picture of this burnt asphalt, and maybe even scooped up some of that molten or was molten metal that was surrounding it. I mean, it would be, oh my gosh, if somebody could produce that would be fantastic.
Ted Phillips would go crazy to get his hand on that, yeah. Especially in those days when he was active. I guess he had about 400 physical trace, material from physical traces where these things had landed, and all. There aren't too many cases. I can think of a handful where these things actually land on, a concrete or asphalt. Usually they land in a field or where you're lucky if you could find a little maybe burnt patch of grass or something. I do remember though that there was a major case in, I think it was Virginia, and I couldn't tell you the date at this point, but it was a top-shaped UFO, and it landed in the middle of the highway and blocked the road for a few minutes and left some impression in the ground. And then, of course, you have the Cash Landrum case, which we have delved into in our book, UFO Hostilities, and the evil alien agenda that just came out a week or so ago. Now, had the same sort of thing happen in the Cash Landrum case, where this object came down and very close to the witnesses and even burnt them severely. I mean, in the book we have photographs of the witnesses after they lost their hair and their hand is all burnt. But also this thing burnt the asphalt on the highway, and the road crew came out and blacktopped it over.
Seems to me the case that you were referring to earlier with the top-shaped UFO flying over the road is a similar situation where not too long afterwards the road crew came out and replaced the asphalt. As soon as Kerry said that his mom came home on a Monday and was visibly upset, I could have told them the rest of the story because I've heard that same scenario time and time again.
There you go. All right. Well, Tim, why don't you continue on with our guest, and let's delve deeper into his interest in the subject and get up to the incident there in Texas, where the windmill was struck by the UFO, and the alien was left behind on the ground. I guess in pretty bad condition. I don't remember.
You've just told all the story there, Tim.
Oh no, it's more detailed than that. But go ahead.
Well, I just have to say, Kerry, that this incident, I mean, that had to have made a lasting impression on you. I mean, most people, the closest they ever come to something like that is seeing, like maybe vague lights in the sky. But there, you and your dad were not too long after an actual landing and seeing the physical evidence.
Yeah, ever since that moment, I was a firm believer in the enigma of flying saucers and extraterrestrials. I mean, there was no doubt that something in the very brief time that frantic phone calls came into the police and we made it over there, which is only a couple of miles. You're talking 7-8 minutes. It was gone. So something landed and took off again in a very short time. So yeah, ever since I've been a believer. And when I've heard about Roswell, studied about Roswell, watched documentaries and read books on Roswell all my life, but I'd never heard anything about Aurora. And like I said, in 2015, my co-author was, and at the time he was just a good friend. We were walking the track one day, and he said, "You ever hear about the little alien that got killed in Texas and buried in the local cemetery?" And I said, "No." And that's really how it started. He told me about it. I watched the episode of Ancient Aliens where they highlighted it and told the story. And I'd been documenting some of the tales from his past, some of the tales from my past, to do something with, to make some kind of screenplay out of, but I didn't know where I was going with it. And once I started researching the Aurora incident, I decided to weave it all together and make a 2-part screenplay. The first part is 1897, which I tried to make as historically accurate as possible, with what little there is to go on from the newspaper reports and a conversation I had with Jim Mars a couple of years ago, and some other in research that I did. And then
recap just the for us exactly what happened. You have the date and the time of day, and set it up for us here.
All right, 6 a.m., April 17th, 1897. A single alien craft, small, maybe 15, 17 feet long, clipped the edge of a fast-moving windmill in Aurora, Texas, 20 miles north of Fort Worth, and slammed into the local town's water tower. Well, the water tower exploded and the craft shattered to the ground. This single alien was dead. Of course, it probably woke up the entire community. They went out, they found him, they hauled off the ship, they buried him in the local cemetery. That's basically the nuts and bolts of the story. It was reported that a Air Corps officer that was or U.S. Army Signal Service guy claimed that he was from the planet Mars. Well, of course, back then they thought every thing that like that was from the planet Mars, but they didn't know. What they did know is they did know that he was not from this world. And
what did he look like?
He looked like your typical gray. He was small, had no hair, the large protruding eyes, bright silver metallic suit. He was your typical gray, probably a scout, probably a single scout. But this was 50 years before Roswell. So I tried to, and nobody knew anything about all this. This was a time when only birds flew in the sky. So what I tried to do in the novel, and the screenplay was written before the novel, but then the novel came about because everybody loved the screenplay, and they said, "Oh, you've got to expand this into a novel." I tried to write and get into detail of the characters from 1897 that would be involved in this, what they would think, how they would react, how they would cope with the knowledge and the realization that this was an extraterrestrial from another planet, from another world that crashed into their little bitty tiny town of like 219 residents.
Now, did they give him a proper burial?
Yes, he was buried in the local cemetery with Christian rites, as reported in the newspaper. And as far as most people know, he is still buried there to this day. Now, they've been, when UPI picked up the story that was long forgotten in 1973, people went running out there with picks and shovels ready to dig him up. The local Aurora City Council put a stop to it, put armed guards in the cemetery at night to keep people away. And then, of course, the hoopla finally died down. But they have took sonar and ground penetrating radar, and there is a small body buried in this. It's been 121 years now, and so but there's a small grave in the spot where he reportedly was buried.
There was. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say there was actually a tombstone there that somebody took off with eventually, right?
Yeah, and there's so many theories about what happened to the tombstone. It was there. It was probably put there in 1897 when it happened, and it was still there in 1973. But in 73, when all this excitement got to going, it was reported.
Well, Kerry, we need to interrupt you here because we have some stolen time of our own as we go to our break. So stay tuned. We'll be back in just a few minutes for more Exploring the Bizarre.
Now back to Exploring the Bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
And welcome back to Exploring the Bizarre. I'm Tim Swartz, along with Timothy Green Beckley. And so let's bring Kathleen Martin into the conversation. It's Kathleen. It's great to have you with us again. It's been a while since you've been on Exploring the Bizarre.
Well, thank you, and it's great to be back.
So now, the last time that you were on, we were talking about this questionnaire that you had put together, not by yourself, but that you had put together concerning abductees and their experiences. And has there been any results yet of that questionnaire? I mean, it's been a few years now. I mean, are you at liberty to talk about what has happened since that time?
I can talk about it, but not in great detail. But
okay.
I have been talking about it. This is called the MUFON Experiencer Questionnaire, or survey, and we have been working on this for 3 full years now. Dr. Don C. Donderi and myself. And Dr. Donderi is a retired psychology professor and statistician from McGill University. And he was one of 3 people who worked on the development of what is known as the American Personality Inventory. The American Personality Inventory is a test that's based upon the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, which is a psychiatric test to determine whether or not a person is mentally stable. But this particular inventory, which was very well developed and researched, can determine whether or not a person is suffering from UFO abduction syndrome. Now, there were 3 categories those who had the syndrome, those who were fakers or simulators or wannabes. And then there was a third category, and those were the ones who were just the control group, the average guy walking down the street who didn't know very much about UFOs. And we had some very interesting results on that. We had more than 500 people who actually completed the experiencer survey, whose exams we could use. We had about 150 more who checked off the wrong questions, and it looked like they were fakers already, or they simply didn't complete the exam. So we had to throw those out. We ended up with 516 usable surveys. And of those, 188 were willing to go on to phase 2. So they took the American Personality Inventory. What we did is we compared the results of those individuals who were the people who had UFO abduction syndrome, the knowledge and the emotional makeup of people who had been abducted, versus those who were just survey takers or those actually at the farthest end of the spectrum too. They were still in the category of being experiencers of contact of some type. They weren't in the faker category or in the guy on the street category. And so we had some pretty interesting results, because those people who were actually the UFO abductees, those who had all of the characteristics of actually being abducted and having UFO abduction syndrome, had things very much in common that the others did not have in common as much. Those are the generational contact, a very high level of generational contact among that particular group. They had had close encounters and missing time experiences, and their family members had as well. They were in the group who said that when asked about their experiences, if they were positive, if they were negative, if these non-human entities were kind to them, or if they were considered them to be evil, what were they? They were the ones who said most often that their contact was pretty much business-like, that there were both positive and negative aspects to it, but it was just pretty much business-like. They said that they underwent changes as a result of contact, and some of those changes were an increase in spirituality. A very, very high percentage became more spiritual as the result of these contact experiences. About half of them had been practicing religion before they were aware that they were having contact. But even though many of them continued to practice their religious doctrine, they became more spiritual in their beliefs. A very high percentage of them have had paranormal experiences in their homes, such as light orbs that sometimes appear to be intelligently controlled, that float through the air or seem to attempt to interact with them. That was the most common paranormal experience that they had in their homes. Most of them said, or 95% said, that they felt that these non-human entities that they interacted with could feel their emotions. They could sense their emotions. And 100% of these abductees stated that they themselves are empathic, so they can feel other people's emotions. About half of them said that they had been healed from a disease, and a variety of different diseases, some cancer, some heart disease, but they said that these non-human entities had actually healed them. So I think that that is very important, because it pretty much runs the gamut of experience. When you talk to the 500 people who are at one end, who are having highly negative experiences, who are being harmed, who feel that they're interacting with evil entities. And at the other end of the spectrum, you have people who are so joyful that they're having these experiences, that they're wonderful, that they're interacting, they have conscious interaction with these entities. And so you can see there's a very wide spectrum there. But those in the center who are the actual abductees who have this syndrome had answers that were very, very much alike. And we found that incredibly interesting. And we asked open-ended questions. And in terms of open-ended questions, we asked, for example, have you been given any information when you were on this craft by these non-human entities? And many of them stated that these entities had voiced concern over our use of nuclear weapons, that they said that, and this dates all the way back to the mid-1950s, to a woman from Maine, from Elliott, Maine, named Frances Swan, who was working.
Oh, yeah, very, very famous case where she actually did the automatic writing and drew people into the circle, and they had sightings and experiences of their own, including what was it, a Navy intelligence officer, commander?
Well, there was Admiral Herbert Knowles, who lived in the same town, and Admiral Knowles had just retired at that time. And she took a thick packet of information to him. And after she began to have these communication experiences, and he read them, and he said that the level of knowledge, scientific knowledge, that was in those documents would have been impossible for her to have. And he was so impressed by this packet that he sent it to Washington with a letter to Dwight Eisenhower. It went to the Office of Naval Research. It went to the Office of Naval Intelligence. It went to the Air Force. It went to the CIA. And there was a group of top brass who actually went up to Elliott, Maine, and interviewed Frances Swan, and one of them actually attempted to use her technique to learn to communicate with these non-humans the way that she did. And I believe it was in 1959 in Washington, D.C. He was there. He had had a couple of failed attempts, but he had a group of other intelligence officers in the room with him, and he asked for a craft to appear. They all went to the window and they looked out, and there was a UFO. They called Washington National Airport and said, "What do you see on your radar?" And what the radar controller at Washington National Airport said is, all of the electromagnetic activity in that section of the sky is blocked. So they could see it, but they couldn't see it on radar. There was somebody else who was involved in all of this too, and that was Wilbert Smith.
In fact, that's where I remember the case from, because we wrote it up. You have a lot more detail, but we wrote it up in our book, Project Magnet, which just came out a couple of months ago. We got some documents on it. In fact, I had a correspondent with Wilbur Smith's family many years ago, and they had quite a file of material after he passed away. But then the people tried to come in and confiscate it. I mean, there were even some talk of some Russian agents and CIA and all that wanted to get their hands on this. He had actually set up a project with the Canadian government back in the early 1950s, and they had tracked the UFO coming in, and thus the name Project Magnet. That was the name of the project that he did all of his research under. In fact, do you know, Kathleen, that he actually had done his own survey back in I guess this would have been the late 1950s and early 1960s. Wilbur Smith had a group of 70 contactees and questionnaires made up, and he would ask them questions and compare the information that they were receiving from their individual sources.
Yes, I'm aware of this, and he was the head of Project Second Story. And what he was doing as part of Second Story is that he was interviewing these contactees who were receiving information, and Frances Swan was working confidentially, and her identity was not known to anyone else. She was not communicating with anyone else. So she was the primary subject. But he was looking at others. Some of them were hoaxers, he found out. Some of them were not giving accurate information. But he did find that some of them did give accurate information that was similar to what Frances Swan was giving. And they were actually looking for scientific evidence that any of this was real. And one thing that these non-human entities said is that they were concerned about the collapsing of the Earth's magnetic field, and that they had been working in a certain part of the world to attempt to repair the Earth's magnetic field. And Wilbur Smith was able to find a scientific article that validated that statement. I was not able to find that article, but I do have the correspondence between Admiral Knowles and Wilbur Smith. When I wrote Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience, I had looked for Wilbur Smith's family, Admiral Knowles' family in Maine. I wasn't able to find them, but I did write what I knew about this project because my aunt and uncle had been invited to meet with Admiral Knowles and a group of Canadian scientists, and met with them many times, in fact, after they had their own experience. And so Admiral Knowles' granddaughter finally found me when I was speaking at a conference and brought me a packet of information, which it was a wealth of knowledge. In fact, I've written about it in a book that's going to be published by the Edgar Mitchell Foundation for research into extraterrestrial encounters. And I'm not sure when it will be published, but I have written a chapter for that book.
Well, that's good. That's good news, because that's certainly one of the foremost incidents that happened during that period. But now I want to ask you about your aunt. Now, how did she stand on all of this? I mean, she didn't claim that she had any great knowledge imparted to her, did she? I mean, did she ever claim that she was receiving information from these beings, or that they ever communicated with her?
No, she had no memory of communication with these non-humans, except for when they abducted her and what she remembered under hypnosis with Dr. Benjamin Simon. And that was that they kept reassuring her that they were not going to harm her. They had to just do a few simple tests. that she and my uncle would be on their way home, that they were going to do this as quickly as possible, and and they even apologized in a sense at the end for frightening them so badly. So that was about the extent of the communication that my aunt received. But somehow, after that experience, it seemed that there were craft that would be interested in her. So perhaps she had an implant, because sometimes when she was in a location, a craft would show up. And she actually did an experiment with a team of scientists back in the it was 1967 that they did this. They called it a psychophysics experiment, where Betty would go onto her back porch and telepathically send messages that these scientists had written down that she was to send, to try to bring a UFO into a certain location, so that these scientists could go out and they could look at that location to see if they could actually see a craft.
And did they?
Yeah, sometimes they did.
Yeah. This was the near the railroad trestle.
There was, part of it was near the railroad tracks. The scientists, two of these scientists were from New York, and one of them had moved south after that, and the experiments continued. And she was attempting to bring a craft in to land on my grandparents' farm in Kingston, New Hampshire. And in 1966, February of 1966, one actually did land on my grandparents' farm. It awakened my grandmother. If she was asleep, she looked out her bedroom window. She saw it coming in. There was a commercial pilot who lived on our street, and he was driving home at that time of night, and he saw the craft as well. There was physical trace evidence on the ground as well. So I do believe that Betty did have some success with all of that, but she also became a huge target for debunkers after my uncle died, because of these, what they thought were crazy experiments that she was conducting.
Well, you know what I wanted to ask you too now. One of my favorite UFO movies that seems to be very realistic is the one that Estelle Parsons and James Earl Jones played Betty in Barney. Had she seen that?
Had who seen it?
Betty. The movie, the TV made for TV movie.
Yes, the movie was made in 1975, and sure, Betty was a consultant on the movie. And had met James Earl Jones and Estelle Parsons, I believe, and she did see the movie. And did she think was a consultant as well?
Yeah. Did she think it was pretty accurate?
Well, she was disappointed in part of it. Her disappointment came because the movie gave the impression that she and Barney recalled almost nothing about the craft, when in fact they had a close encounter. Barney even had conscious recall of observing these non-human entities looking down at him. And this was over quite about an hour, where this craft came in closer and closer, that they observed it. So the movie gave the impression that it was more of a light in the sky, and that was all there was. And then, they were bothered by the light, but it was far more than that. But she was very impressed with James Earl Jones.
Oh, he's tremendous.
He was a fantastic actor.
Yeah, absolutely. But now, Barney was more frightened than Betty. Didn't he have a revolver with him?
Yes, it was actually Betty's revolver, and they did have it. They actually took it. Barney took it because when he and his first wife were on a trip to Detroit, They ended up spending one night. He grew very tired driving, and they stopped by the side of the road. And he was very, very worried that criminals might come along, and he thought that he would be safer with a gun, particularly because here it is, 1961, interracial couple, and they were going on to Canada. Barney had no idea what the racial climate was up in Canada, which it was much better than it was in the United States, but he didn't know that. He also made this a surprise trip for Betty. So they had only the cash that they had in the house. She didn't have time to go to the bank to get some extra money. And it was might have had gas.
No ATMs then, I guess.
No ATMs. I mean, any credit cards would have been gasoline credit cards, I guess.
Yeah.
Anyway, he thought maybe they would have to spend the night beside the road. And so he took that gun for that reason. And he took the gun and put it into his pocket when the craft was hovering 100 feet above their car. He stepped out of that car and he used the binoculars to look up at the craft. And when he was doing it, the craft then shifted to an adjacent field to the east, and he walked toward the craft. And that is when he saw these non-human entities looking down at him, and he became terribly frightened. He said that he felt he was going to be captured like a bug in a net. He knew that they had a plan for him when all but one moved away from this road.
All right, I'm going to have to interrupt you here because we have to go to our top of the hour break. We'll be back.
Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
All right, and welcome back to the second hour of Exploring the Bizarre. I'm Tim Swartz. Tonight, we've got just a fantastic UFO-related program. I know UFOs, that's our favorite subject, and we have Carrie Trent Haggard and Kathleen Martin. And so I want to bring Carrie back into the conversation. When we had to go to our previous break, Carrie, we were talking about the tombstone that had been, allegedly at the Aurora Cemetery. Now, I mean, I remember when in 1973, when all this came to light, and there had, I seem to remember that there was an actual picture, like maybe an AP photo of this tombstone, rather crudely made, but then shortly thereafter it disappeared. People were blaming, sightseers or things like that. But I've often wondered whether or not the town of Aurora themselves just took it away to try to, it was like you said, there were a lot of people, going there with shovels and pickaxes trying to dig this thing up. And if they didn't know where to dig, well, all the better.
Yeah, that's one of the theories. It disappeared in '73 in the middle of the night. So one of the theories is that the Aurora people, the city council people, said, "Okay, we got to get rid of this thing." Another is that somebody stole it just to have a souvenir, but it's never been found. Interesting note here in the last few months, a Dallas, I think he's a Dallas or Fort Worth lawyer, has issued a $1,000 reward if somebody with information to its whereabouts were to bring it back or return it, no questions asked.
What was there something inscripted on the tombstone?
Yeah, it had a sketch of a cigar-shaped craft with 3 windows in it.
Well, now why? Okay, so it seems like there's a substantial amount of evidence that this case took place, but yet there are some out there who are very skeptical and say that the whole thing is nothing but a urban legend when was made up by the newspaper at the time.
Right. Well, Aurora had a tough time. It wasn't too long after the Civil War. They'd had a boll weevil infestation that wiped out most of their crops. The railroad had skirted them for another town, which they were really counting on to bring people in and tourists and revenue and money. They'd had a fire burnt down half of the town. They'd had an outbreak of spotted fever. One of the theories is that all this was made up to save the dying town. But the truth is, in 1897, how could a UFO incident save a dying town? It's not logical because
how big of a town are we talking about?
In 1897, it was like 200-300 people, and so nobody's going to go rushing over there in 1897 to investigate this. There was
no parades once a year, no museum in town.
No need for no excuse whatsoever to make up a story like this to try to save the town. It wasn't feasible. But I think that's just one more excuse to dismiss the story.
Well, and plus that whole bring in the tourist type of scenario, that's really more of a modern construct. Like you said, I mean, here we are at the end of the 19th century, and, unless they actually had the body, pickled and hung up in the local tavern, it wouldn't have done them much good.
No. The idea of making up that to try to help their revenue, it makes no sense.
Mm-hmm. Now, 1897, there had been a airship flap taking place across the country. So this incident did not occur in a vacuum.
No, there had been hundreds and hundreds of sightings. Civil War soldiers had signed affidavits saying that they saw flying craft in the air. There were reports all throughout the Midwest from the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s. One from let's see here. One from September 1864 says that here it is. A skyrocket streaked through the sky above the Great Falls, Upper Missouri, which moments later crashed with a monstrous explosion that shook the entire forest and emanated such heat on impact that it turned the ground to glass. That was reported in the Cincinnati Commercial, September 1864. So, I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of reports of strange flying craft, airships, if you will. It's not like there was one airship hovering over for 3 years. This was multiple craft that had been sighted and reported. But there's lots of documentation of UFOs in the Old West. So
the original story ran by the local newspaper after the crash. Was this picked up and carried by the wire services, or was it pretty much contained to that location?
It was in the Dallas and the Fort Worth newspaper on April 19th, 2 days after the crash. I mean, this is a time when the telegraph office was the only way to do
Yeah,
wire
yeah. I don't
communication.
think there was no Associated Press. I don't think
No,
back in those days. Doubt it.
no. And you're talking about a time when the fastest mode of transportation was the railroad train that clacked along at 40 miles an hour. The story moved very slowly and probably didn't go anywhere beyond Dallas and Fort Worth.
So, how then was the story? Okay, because I take it then that the story basically then just died and disappeared. Everyone had forgotten about it except for the locals. How was it rediscovered again?
Well, now that's again, I don't know. What I do know is that it was investigated in 1965 on a small scale. And a UPI, like I said, got a hold of the story in 1973 and did big front page articles of a extraterrestrial crashed in the turn of the century and was buried in a local Aurora, Texas cemetery. So that's what got all the hoopla going again. But yeah, the story had basically been forgotten, and only some a few dedicated real ufologists knew about it, and they had actually done a small study on it in 1965, but it didn't really get attention again until 73.
Yeah, that would probably have been the early investigation by Hayden Hughes. I think he wrote he had this a little a magazine that he put out because I used to write for it, and he also wrote a paperback book with Brad Steiger, the name of which escapes me, and I'm pretty sure that it was in there at the time. Now, I remember seeing on UFO Hunters on the History Channel, wasn't there a story attached to this that the alien had ended up, or they had buried him in the well or something?
No, the craft was dumped in a well.
What happened? The craft was okay. Uh-huh.
Yeah, the remains of the craft were dumped in an abandoned well, and it poisoned the well. So I think they got it out of there in like 1957, and I don't know what they did with it from there. But the people that had drank out of that well during the time developed some horrible arthritis, like debilitating arthritis from it.
Yes,
so
yes, I remember seeing. I remember seeing photographs of at least one gentleman who was stricken with the arthritis in his hands and all because of supposedly because of drinking the water. Now, okay, you investigated this case and you've written it up in novelized form. Has anyone approached you either to tell you to maybe you should leave well enough alone, or on the other hand, telling you that they might have some additional information?
Well, no. Flying Disc Press over in England published the novel for me back in.
Philip Mantle.
Philip Mantle. He published the novel for me back a couple of months ago, and I've done probably a dozen radio shows, and we've got some pretty good press and done several interviews. I have a couple of MUFON speaking events lined up. I'm doing a book signing at the big conference in New Jersey in July. And no, nobody's approached me to tell me anything like that. Nobody's contacted me and said, you need to stop talking about this. Nothing like that. I did have one very interesting conversation with a guy through Facebook. He found me on there and we corresponded a couple of times. He said that his great grandfather buried the alien, and there wasn't one, there was two. I'd never heard that story before. Said his great grandmother or his grandmother told him the story in 1972 that a craft about the size of a small car crashed and into the water tower and windmill, and that there was two aliens and they were buried. One was buried, and he didn't know what happened to the other one because his uncle or great grandfather buried the one. Now, I don't know, but he was from Fort Worth, and he said that he, his kinfolks was from Aurora. So, who knows if it's true, if it's not true or whatever, but I'd never, ever heard that there was two before. I'd always heard it was one.
Well, now, I remember there were some witnesses that were very elderly, but they were still with us at the time, who were interviewed for one of these TV shows like Unsolved Mysteries or something. I don't remember exactly which one.
Yes, there was one woman. She claimed that the whole thing was a hoax, but she never saw anything. There was another guy on there that claimed that, yep, it was real, that he was a little boy at the time, that his father went into town and came back and told him all about it, and said there was pieces of it everywhere, and the little bitty guy was, he saw the little guy. My thinking is, and this was never published, but and this is the way I wrote it in my novel, is, outlaws and famous people at the time, they built coffins for them, they put them in it, they put them on the boardwalk and took pictures of them. I just wonder if they put this little guy on display for a day before they buried him, where people that did hear about it from the area could come in and take a look at him. From the way that it talked of this boy talked of his father going into town, there was a lot of people going into town to see him, and they did. So yes, you get some when they did these interviews back then. I mean, everybody from that time is gone now, but when they did it way back then, several of them said yes, it was true, and there was a couple said no, it was a fake. So you get 50-50. Yeah. Personally, I believe it absolutely happened. I spoke to Jim Mars, like I said, and he believed it absolutely happened. So there you go.
Yeah, Jim Mars had the opportunity to very early on to get in there and actually interview some of the people who were still alive, that had witnessed this event. And you're probably right, though. I mean, I find that really interesting that this creature, entity, whatever you want to call it, probably was sitting in a coffin for a little while before they finally buried it. But I'm like you. I have never heard anybody ever mention that there were two creatures found at this crash site. It was always one.
No, I hadn't either. And talking about Jim Mars, he was one of the investigators there in 1973.
Mm-hmm.
So he had been investigating this since 1973 up until the time he died. He'd done documentaries, he'd wrote books, he'd wrote articles, he'd spoke at conferences. He knew the Aurora case better than anyone. And he told me he firmly believed that it happened, and he was thrilled that I was doing this novel, even though it was a part fiction, but it was paying homage to the crash, that to get the word out about it, because it's one of those cases that just doesn't get talked about.
Well, now, why did you decide to take the novelization approach to this book?
Well, I wrote the screenplay, and that was my whole goal, was to make a great movie out of it. But the people that read the screenplay said, "Oh my gosh, this is so good! You need to do it as a novel." So I went back and spent another year and a half and developed it into a novel. Expanded it, wrote backgrounds for the characters, and just let it form itself into a 262-page novel. And again, though the screenplay was written first, so I'm just hoping that one of these days I can find somebody that is interested enough to make the screenplay into a full movie.
Where's Oliver Stone when you need him?
So now your novel is in two parts. One part takes place, in the 19th century with the crash, and then it brings it up to modern times with what are they like trying to find the body or the crash site, or what's going on?
Well, it goes back and forth from 1897 to 1997, and the premise of the book is in 1997. This girl reporter in Gainesville, Texas, which is like 50 miles from Aurora, she writes a column called A Century in the News and discovers this old ancient article about this the original article about the crash into the windmill. And she takes it to her editor. He gets all excited. He sends her over to find out what's going on, find out where he's buried, write a follow-up story to it. And of course, that stirs up all kinds of trouble because the locals have been trying to keep this quiet and keep where he was buried hidden for the last 100 years. And she's over there and turning over stones and getting the FBI involved and causing all this trouble. Now, all that's fiction, but that the flashback sequences to 1897 are written and described exactly as it would have happened. Mm-hmm. So again, it's the novel is basically historical fiction based on the actual event.
Is there a similarity? Okay, you talked about how the locals, in the novelization part, are trying to keep this a secret and trying to, keep people away. Do you think that's, more than likely that was going on in the 1970s? Is that still the case, or do you think it's now the locals are wanting to embrace this unique story?
Oh, now the locals they've got a little spaceship built out in a little Aurora Park celebrating the event. They have an annual visit to the cemetery and a keynote speaker that comes out. So, yeah, of course, now they're making money off. Now they're making money off of it. It's a tourist attraction now. If you go to the Aurora website, there's a flying saucer flying around on their Aurora City website. So yeah, they're capitalizing on it now. After all this time,
what's the population of Aurora these days?
I have no idea.
It's a little bit more than the 300.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. But they do have a nice looking website, and it shows the flying saucer on it. So yeah, they're capitalizing on it now. But I think in 1973 they just wished the whole event would go away because people were over there asking questions that they didn't want to talk about.
And why do you think they did want to talk about it then?
Well, that's a good question. That would have been a question for Jim Mars. As far as I know, they just country people of the time back then, it wasn't a popular subject for them. It'd been so long ago, they didn't want to discuss it. They didn't want all this trampling through their graveyard, for one thing.
Yeah, and if aliens did exist, a lot of them would have seen them as being demonic.
Yeah, the 70s, back then that was a whole different time than now. Mm-hmm. They didn't want to talk about this back then. Where today, they're like I said, they're capitalizing on it.
Well, and plus back then, and I grew up in, in rural communities. You didn't air your dirty laundry to outsiders, and a story like that. Yeah, you don't talk about that. That's just something, it's just like, nope, we're just not going to talk to it.
Right.
So, yeah. So I can understand that part completely. So I wonder how long it'll be, Tim, before they Point Pleasant and places like that before they have a yearly convention and fair and festival and all that.
Well, I'm sure they're probably setting it up and organizing it
right as we speak.
As we speak. But now, have you? Are there other cases that you've investigated outside of this one?
Aurora?
Yeah.
Yes.
No, I hadn't really investigated any, except for UFOs in the Old West. Like I said, I got to do some presentations at a couple of MUFON events coming up. So I put together a nice slideshow that talks about UFOs in the Old West, shows some photos from the Old West of flying saucers, and I've got several accounts from the 1860s and 70s to read, and but to delve into a specific event, no. I've read a lot about Roswell and understand what happened, but
yeah.
No,
I remember there's a case we wrote up in one of our books. I don't know how well it's documented. I don't know how much detail we had, but an object supposedly crashed, and they had some of the wreckage, and they left it in the window of one of the stores in town, and somebody came and offered him money for it, and then I think it disappeared from the window.
I think that was in Missouri somewhere. Of course, then that was you're starting to get out west.
We're talking about the 1860s.
Yeah. All right, we need to go to our bottom of the hour break here, so we will continue with more UFOs on Exploring the Bizarre. Steve.
Now back to Exploring the Bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Final segment of the show. So we need to get right into it. And Kathleen, I wanted to ask you, you were talking during a previous segment about the questionnaire, and I find it really intriguing. So many of these people that you talk to had experienced what, for want of a better word, paranormal experiences after, during, continuing their experiences. Now, I know that we really are. We're just shouting in the dark. But I know that a lot of the like nuts and bolts UFO believers, they just want to put their hands up over the ears and go la 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 la. When you start talking about the paranormal and UFOs, yet time and time again we see this crop up. So there has to be something going on.
Absolutely. I mean, at least 65% of the experiencers who participated in this research project have light orbs in their homes that float. One of them, one of the big cases that I have investigated, had a lot of photographs of light orbs, and this man was diagnosed with cancer, lymphoma, and they believed that it might have been metastatic. And he went to bed one night, and this light orb slid down the wall, flew across the room, sort of like a butterfly, and just dove down into his body. When he woke up 12 to 14 hours later, and he caught this on video, when he woke up, the nodes in his neck were almost gone, where they had been very swollen and wrapped around to the back of his neck.
Now, was this associated though with UFO sightings? I mean, is there a connection?
Oh yes, he's an experiencer. He's an abductee. And there is a definite connection between experiencers, contactees, abductees, all of them have it, and these light orbs in their homes. A lot of people think that the ETs are able to insert their consciousness into a ball of light, which will really upset the nuts and bolts people.
Oh yeah.
Well, I would think so. But okay, so now do these beings, these entities, they obviously are not from the same locations?
Well, they certainly look different.
Yeah.
I have some photographs that some people have taken off them. They're allowing themselves to be photographed more now than ever. The electromagnetic field that they would put up previously was so intense it would drain the batteries of the camera, or you get just blurry lines. I've been receiving some fairly clear photographs of it.
Is there anything that you could share with us for our YouTube presentation?
I'm going to be, no, I can't, but I'm going to be showing some of this when I'm speaking this year.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And so it will be on my slide.
Where are you speaking?
Well, one place where I'll be speaking is at the Mutual UFO Networks International Symposium, and that is going to be in July in Cherry Hill, New Jersey.
Oh.
I'm going to be doing 2 sessions for experiencers at 7:30 in the morning on Saturday and Sunday, and I will be showing those photographs then. And then on Sunday, I'm also lecturing from the main stage. And
well, if I am in a good health at the time, I will come down to attend. I'm not all that far away. I haven't been to a good UFO conference in a while. There's a fellow by the name of Pat Marcatilio that used to have conventions there in Trenton. Yes, he's a. I was wondering, perhaps we should invite him on the show. I haven't spoken to him in a while. He's kind of a charming fellow, a Dr. UFO, I believe he refers to himself.
Yes.
I know he had a license. His car vanity plates were Dr. UFO or something like that. Yeah.
Yes,
quite
he
a
did.
character. Yeah, quite a character. Yeah. And he has his own little traveling UFO museum.
Uh-huh.
So there you go. But so now. Oh, okay. So you have these. Yeah, go ahead.
In Roswell at the beginning of July, and I'll be up in Toronto June 22nd through 24th.
What's going on up there?
It's the UFO conference.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and is that the one Richard Serrett puts together?
Well, I've been talking to Stu Bundy.
Uh-huh. Yeah, because Richard, you've probably been on his show. He has the conspiracy program on Zoomer. Is it Zoomer Radio, Tim?
Yes.
Because we've been on there a couple of times ourselves. But okay, so you have these now. What size are the orbs? I mean, are we talking about baseball size? I mean, are they usually pretty small? Are they all the same?
They're all generally about the size of a baseball or a softball. In the photographs, they appear to have a white interior and a blue exterior. They're not all the same color. I've received other ones from individuals. Some are red, some are yellow, some were gray, but those were more in negative experiences. But in the more positive experiences, and from the reports that I have, they have that sort of light blue outer surface and seem to be white on the inside.
Anybody try to capture one?
I don't think they can capture them. I don't know if anybody has tried to.
Get the vacuum cleaner out.
In fact, I can tell you a story about a personal experience I had.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
After that craft landed across the street from my childhood home on my grandparents' farm that Betty had tried to vector in, we started to have light orbs in my childhood home. And that was about the time I was going off to college. So I sort of took it with a grain of salt. I thought maybe my family was getting a little kooky at that time. But I'll tell you, years later, here I am, married. I have 2 children, and I'm back at my parents' house with my kids. And my son wakes me up in the middle of the night. He's in my brother's bedroom, which, because my brother's grown up and gone, but he's in that bedroom where a lot of that activity took place. And he's wreaking havoc in the middle of the night, yelling and running around. So I get up, I go into his bedroom, And there he is chasing one of those orbs around, trying to jump up and bat it. And it looked like it was having fun too. Scared the heck out of me. I picked my son up and immediately took him into my bedroom. But I have seen one, and it was, I'd say, about the size of a baseball, softball, something like that. Not little.
Are they able to pass through objects? Do they make any sound?
Yes, they can pass through objects. Mm. And I've never heard of them making a sound.
And okay, so they pass through objects. They seem to obviously are they remote controlled, or are they an intelligence of their own?
You know, I just think that I agree that these non-human entities are able to insert intelligence into this like little plasma ball of light, and they seem to have intention. And people report that sometimes they expand into a non-human entity.
Ooh.
Perhaps it's the other way around, because we have all of these different shapes, sizes of these entities that are being seen. Perhaps that's their natural form. Perhaps they are just balls of light, and they're able to assume really any kind of shape, I suppose, maybe based on the perception of the human eyewitness.
Well, could be for some of them, you know, and I do believe that they are interdimensional to begin with from all of the research that I have done, because certainly they can pass through solid surfaces. And so maybe they are, you hear of experiencers and I've talked to Susie Hansen, for example, and she's from New Zealand, and she talks about these light orbs. And when she was a child, she would go to a craft, and these non-humans would have these blue balls of light, and the children would practice using their minds in order to sort of play a game with these light orbs, where they would become buoyant and they would move in the air, and a child would move it to another child, and that sort of thing. And what Susie said is that they contain souls. And she said that one of them contained the soul of the son that she was going to have when she grew up.
Wow. That's a mind-blowing...
It's very mind-blowing. And I have to tell you, Dr. Rudy Shield, who's an astrophysicist who recently retired from Harvard, wrote commentary in Susie's book based upon the quantum holographic theory. So,
now, what is the lady's name?
Susie Hansen.
Okay. I've read some of her stuff. We were regular contributors to this magazine, Ufology, which was published in Australia, and in fact, it was the last English magazine on the subject. Actual printed magazine, which just folded a couple months ago. But she's had some fairly incredible experiences. If there wasn't such a time difference between here and Australia, we would like to have her on, but haven't been able to make contact. But okay, now we have this. Okay, why do they need physical craft then, if they're able to come here and take on these plasma type balls or orbs, as we call them? What do they need to come in metallic spacecraft for then?
Well, the craft appears to be biomechanical. And some people even believe that it's all biological, but I don't agree with that. But and I am not a physicist. I've only taken one course in physics, so I say a lot of this is better understood by theoretical physicists than certainly by myself. But even though the craft has a metallic component, and we know that it has because the evidence has been collected and analyzed over the years in laboratories. So we know that it has this mechanical component, but it also, based upon the reports that I receive, seems to have a biological component as well, that it seems to control the craft, that being in the central core of that craft is almost like being inside of a beating heart. And there seems to be intelligence inside of that central core. And I mean, it sounds crazy to us because we are so primitive technologically, and it doesn't seem to be possible given our materialistic scientific laws. But I receive these reports over and over and over again, even though some of this information hasn't even been publicized.
Well, it really does make sense, though, if you think about it, because look at all these reports that people have. I mean, just regular, like they see like a UFO flying over their house, and they'll say that they had the impression that the craft knew that they were there, that it was aware of them, that they just got this feeling that whatever the UFO was, it was aware of them.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and supposedly the intelligence of the non-human entities on that craft is able to connect with the intelligence of the craft, so that they almost become like one unit where everyone knows what everyone else is doing and where they are. And I've been told that the craft is capable of deflecting anything that is thrown at it, so that it can travel through space without being destroyed.
I have a question I want to throw out to both of you. We hear so much about, recently, of course, supposed disclosure has been in the news. There's been the article in the New York Times, and in some release of videos of these objects taken under very good conditions. Who's holding back on this, and why would you say, Kerry? Let's start out with you. What I mean, do you think that there's a cover-up going on here?
Well, most countries around the world have released their UFO files. The U.S. still remains defiant to do that. There's not so much of a cover-up anymore, I don't think. It's just there's so much other world news going on, it dwarfs that. But there hasn't been any major events either to cover up. So I don't know. I do know that most other countries are going ahead and saying, this has been true, and we have been holding back, but they've been releasing files for the last few years, but the U.S. doesn't want to do that. But I do believe that.
Then on the other hand, the president gets on the Jerry Kimmel show and he sits there and talks about UFOs for 5 or 6 minutes. I mean, so. I I always say disclosure. Hell, this was disclosed a long time ago. If you don't want to, look at it and you want to sweep it under the carpet and say, well, it doesn't exist, or it doesn't. I don't want it to exist in my, my life. I'd rather ignore it. Well, the information is there. I mean, there have been. In fact, Tim, when I looked it up on Amazon, 20,000 books on the subject of UFOs. Wow. And even if half of them are crap, there's got to be a couple of thousand that aren't. I mean, we've had some great guests on the show. There are people out there that have looked into this subject very seriously for many, many years. So the information is there if you want to, make it available to yourself. And If you don't, well, that's your problem. That's what I always say. I don't think anybody has to get on the news at 6 o'clock and say the aliens arrived, because most people, I think there's a good chance that they realize, and if they don't, so what? I mean, that's kind of my opinion on this. You either accept it or you don't accept it.
Yeah, open-minded people have had the opportunity to understand that we've been visited for decades. They're not going to get on the 6 o'clock news and do a presentation and say, "Yeah, we covered all this up," because I mean, it would destroy. It would cause panic. It would destroy.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know if it would cause. Hey, if this country could get away with what's going on now in this world, I don't know if anything would cause panic at this point. I don't know, panic. I think I would I think a lot of people would welcome a little attention from outer space. But Kathleen, you're in the middle of this. I mean, do you see any major breakthrough? I mean, is anybody going to open the valve, so to speak, and let out more of this information, or make some outstanding a statement that will send us reeling out of the room or back on our heels?
I'm somewhat pessimistic about that. And the reason for that is the experiencer survey demonstrated to me that experiencers view themselves differently than those who are not. They view themselves as people of Earth, not as someone who has a loyalty to a little nationalistic country. But our governments view themselves in a very nationalistic kind of way. Our economy is based upon war and building weapons, and a lot of money is to be made by doing that. If
there's you mean there's no money in orbs?
No. If we were to announce that we are being visited by several extraterrestrial civilizations.
70 of them, I heard. I don't know, 70 of them they're coming here, yeah.
We would begin to view ourselves as one world. And that would be a financial disaster for those who have an interest in making money through war and through...
I would guess so. Hey, we're coming up. We're coming up on the, I was going to say, witching hour here, and we're all going to turn into orbs in a couple of minutes. So I want to give you all the opportunity, Carrie, to tell us, where can they get your book? What are you up to? And how can people get in touch with you?
Well, it's on Amazon. The name of the novel is Traveler. It's by me, Kerry Trent Haggard. That's the easiest way to find it. It's just... my name's Kerry, Trent Haggard, and Traveler, so it's on Amazon. And I'm here in Pennsylvania shooting a show on antique cars, so that's what I'm doing.
All right, antique cars. Yeah. I used to go and visit Muhammad Ali, and he had classic cars. I don't know if that would be considered antique or not, but he had quite a collection of cars. And Kathleen, where do you go from here? Got a book in the works?
Pardon me?
Got a book or two in the works?
Yes, I do have a new book in the works. I believe it will be released in July. It's The Experiencer's Handbook, a book written specifically for experiencers. And you can purchase any of my 4 books that I have now, autographed copies, on my website or on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. They're available in multiple formats through Amazon and Barnes & Noble and other online bookstores.
Well, you can Google all of us. And Tim, we have a couple of new books out. One on Nikola Tesla that you put together, and the Purple Plates.
Right.
And we've got another one on
Alien
UFO,
Hostilities.
Alien Hostilities, and of course, Winged Wonders, which is one of my favorite books on cryptozoology. And if you go to Amazon.com and just type in Tim Schwartz or Tim Beckley, you'll find out in almost 300 titles. And you could always find us on the Facebook. It's Tim Beckley and Tim Schwartz. And of course, tune into KCOR Radio every Thursday, and go to our YouTube channel, Mr. UFO Secret Files. We're approaching 200 audio and videos up there, and you can spend the rest of your life just there on Mr. UFO Secret Files. And good night, one and all, including the orbs.
You've been listening to Exploring the Bizarre with hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz. They're taking back the night by jetting non-stop across the cosmos in search of the truly bizarre and totally unexplained, with you as their co-pilot. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on Exploring the Bizarre and hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz, check out their KCOR Digital Radio Network page. Follow their YouTube channel at MRUFO 1100. Exploring the Bizarre.